2 years ago, I thought I had won the lottery. After years of apartment living and noisy neighbors, I finally had enough saved for a down payment on a house in Sunset Meadows, one of those picture-perfect HOA communities with tree-lined streets and homes that looked like they belonged in a magazine. The realtor walked me through the pristine neighborhoods, pointing out the perfectly trimmed hedges, the uniform mailboxes, and the spotless sidewalks. Every lawn was emerald green. Every driveway was pressure-washed clean. Every house number was exactly the same font and size. "The HOA here really maintains standards," she said with pride. "They have strict guidelines, but that is what keeps property values so high." I was sold. After living in chaos for so long, the idea of rules and order felt like a blessing. I wanted nothing more than to be the perfect neighbor, the guy who followed every regulation and kept his property immaculate. For the first 6 months, life was exactly what I had dreamed of. I studied the HOA handbook like it was scripture. Grass height between 2 and 3 inches. Check. Garbage can stored out of sight except on pickup days. Check. No holiday decorations up for more than 30 days. Check. I spent my weekends maintaining my small front garden, pressure washing my driveway, and making sure my mailbox stayed perfectly straight. My neighbors would wave politely as they walked their dogs. Everything felt orderly and peaceful. That is when I met Karen Henderson. She appeared at my front door on a Saturday morning, holding a clipboard and wearing the brightest smile I had ever seen. Karen was probably in her mid-50s, with short blonde hair and the kind of energy that made you tired just watching her. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she announced. "I am Karen, your community liaison. I help new residents understand all our wonderful community standards." She seemed genuinely helpful at first. Karen explained which garbage company to use, which landscaping services the HOA preferred, and which paint colors were pre-approved if I ever wanted to touch up my shutters. "I just love helping people fit in," she said, her eyes scanning my front yard with the intensity of a security guard. "It is so important that we all maintain the same high standards." I appreciated the guidance. Karen even complimented my lawn care and said my property was already one of the nicest on the block. For a moment, I felt proud to have such an engaged neighbor looking out for the community. But as weeks turned into months, I began noticing things. Karen would appear whenever I was outside, always with that same bright smile and clipboard. She would ask questions about my weekend plans, who was visiting me, and why I was grilling on a Tuesday evening. "Just making sure everything stays peaceful and quiet," she would say with a laugh that did not quite reach her eyes. I loved to cook. It was my way of unwinding after long days at the office. I would invite a few close friends over maybe twice a month for dinner on my back patio. We kept the music low, cleaned up thoroughly, and never stayed late. It was exactly the kind of quiet, responsible socializing that should fit perfectly in a community like Sunset Meadows. But Karen always seemed to know when I had guests. She would find reasons to walk past my backyard fence, taking notes on her ever-present clipboard. She would count cars in my driveway and time how long people stayed. "Just keeping an eye on things," she would explain if I caught her lurking near my property line. "You understand." The friendly welcome was slowly transforming into something that made my skin crawl. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes watching me. Every time I had friends over, I wondered what Karen was writing down in her little notebook. I tried to brush off the uncomfortable feeling. Maybe she was just overly enthusiastic about community involvement. Maybe she really did care about maintaining neighborhood standards. Maybe I was being paranoid. But deep down, I was starting to realize that Karen saw herself as more than just a helpful neighbor. She had appointed herself as the unofficial enforcer of Sunset Meadows, and for some reason I could not understand, she had decided that I needed constant supervision. The first violation notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after meeting Karen. I found the official HOA envelope stuffed in my mailbox, marked Urgent Property Violation. My hands actually shook as I opened it. According to the notice, my grass was allegedly exceeding regulation height by approximately half an inch, and I had failed to maintain uniform lawn appearance consistent with community standards. I walked outside and stared at my lawn. It looked identical to every other yard on the street. I grabbed a ruler and measured multiple spots, 2.5 inches, well within the 2 to 3 inch regulation clearly stated in the HOA handbook. But there it was in black and white, a formal complaint filed by concerned community member and investigated by the HOA Compliance Committee. I had 7 days to correct the violation or face escalating penalties. I spent that entire weekend obsessively mowing, edging, and trimming until my lawn looked like a golf course. The violation was clearly frivolous, but I was not going to give them any excuse to find fault with my property. 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived. This time, my mailbox was supposedly crooked and not aligned with community standards. I marched outside with a level, perfectly straight. I took photos from multiple angles to document that my mailbox was identical to every other mailbox on the street. But the complaints kept coming. My car was allegedly parked improperly in my own driveway, though no one could explain what improperly meant. My garden hose was supposedly visible from the street, despite being neatly coiled behind my garage. My outdoor light was allegedly too bright, even though it was the same standard fixture that came with every house in the development. Each violation notice was signed by the same HOA compliance officer, but I knew exactly who was filing these bogus complaints. Karen had escalated from nosy neighbor to active harassment campaign. The breaking point came when I discovered her photographing my guests' license plates. I was having dinner with my brother and his wife when I noticed a flash of light outside my dining room window. I stepped onto my front porch and found Karen crouched behind her car with a camera, taking pictures of my brother's truck. "Karen, what are you doing?" She stood up quickly, clutching her camera against her chest. "Oh, hello there, I was just documenting some community safety concerns." "You were photographing my guest's vehicle." "Well, yes. We have had reports of excessive visitor traffic at your residence. I am just keeping records to ensure community standards are being maintained." My blood pressure spiked. Reports from who? And what exactly is excessive about my brother having dinner with me? Karen's smile never wavered, but her voice took on a sharp edge. "I think you will find that the HOA covenants clearly state that residents are responsible for guest behavior and parking compliance. I am simply doing my part to keep our community safe and peaceful." That night, I called the HOA management company to file a complaint about harassment. The receptionist was polite but unhelpful. "We take all resident concerns seriously," she said in a monotone voice. "However, Mrs. Henderson is an active community volunteer and compliance liaison. She has the authority to document potential violations for investigation." "But there are no violations. These complaints are completely fabricated." "Sir, I understand your frustration. However, if you believe a violation notice is issued in error, you have the right to appeal through the proper channels." The proper channels involved filling out multiple forms, attending board meetings, and essentially proving my innocence every time Karen decided to target me. It was designed to be so bureaucratic and time-consuming that most people would just give up. But Karen was not satisfied with bureaucratic warfare. She began recruiting other neighbors to validate her complaints. I would see her having intense conversations with Mrs. Peterson from 2 houses down, both of them staring directly at my property while they talked. She started organizing community safety walks that somehow always ended up clustered around my house. The final straw came during what should have been a quiet dinner party with 4 close friends. We were sitting on my back patio, speaking in normal conversation voices, when Karen appeared at my back gate with her clipboard and cell phone. "Excuse me," she called out loudly. "I am receiving noise complaints about excessive volume and disruption of neighborhood peace." My friends fell silent, staring at this stranger who had just interrupted our private conversation in my own backyard. "Karen, we are having a normal conversation at a normal volume. It is 7 o'clock on a Saturday evening. The HOA noise ordinance clearly states that residents must maintain reasonable noise levels that do not disturb neighbors. I have 3 separate complaints about excessive noise coming from this property tonight. 3 complaints about 6 people having dinner and talking quietly, in my own backyard, at 7 o'clock in the evening. That night, after my embarrassed friends left early, I sat alone on my patio and realized that reasoning with Karen was impossible. She had transformed from annoying busybody into something far more dangerous. She was systematically trying to drive me out of my own home using bureaucratic terrorism. I needed a new strategy. The declaration of war came disguised as another one of Karen's friendly neighborhood visits. I was watering my front garden on a peaceful Sunday morning when she appeared with her trademark clipboard, and that smile that no longer fooled me. "Good morning," she chirped. "I hope you are having a wonderful weekend." I turned off the hose and braced myself. Karen never made social visits without an agenda. "I wanted to chat with you about some upcoming plans I heard you might be making," she continued, her pen already poised over her clipboard. My nephew Tommy was turning 12 the following weekend, and I had mentioned to my brother that we should have a small birthday barbecue in my backyard. Somehow, Karen had already gotten wind of our family celebration. "You mean my nephew's birthday party?" "Well, yes. I just want to make sure we are all on the same page about community standards for gatherings." Her smile tightened slightly. "The HOA has very specific guidelines about residential events." I felt that familiar surge of anger rising in my chest. "Karen, it is a birthday party for a 12-year-old boy. We are talking about family members eating hamburgers in my backyard." "I understand completely," she said, her voice taking on that condescending tone I had learned to hate. "But we have had several noise complaints about your previous gatherings, and I want to make sure this event does not create similar disturbances." She flipped through several pages on her clipboard before rattling off a list of demands that made my jaw drop. First, no music of any kind, even at low volumes. Second, all guests must leave by 8 p.m. sharp. Third, no excessive food preparation or grilling smells that might drift to neighboring properties. Fourth, parking is limited to your driveway only, with overflow guests required to park at least 3 blocks away. I stared at her in disbelief. "You want me to tell my family they cannot park on a public street to attend a child's birthday party?" "It is about maintaining community standards," she replied smoothly. "Excessive parking creates safety hazards and disrupts the peaceful residential atmosphere we all value." But Karen was not finished. She had more conditions. Also, I will need a complete guest list submitted to the HOA Compliance Committee at least 48 hours in advance. We need to verify that attendee numbers fall within acceptable limits for residential gatherings. Something snapped inside me at that moment. This woman wanted me to submit paperwork to have my own family over for a birthday party. She wanted to pre-approve my guest list like I was running some kind of commercial event, instead of celebrating my nephew turning 12. And if I refused to comply with these demands? Karen's mask finally slipped completely. The fake smile disappeared, replaced by cold calculation. Then I will be forced to contact HOA enforcement and potentially local authorities about unpermitted gatherings and community disruption. I really hope it does not come to that. She was threatening to call the police on a child's birthday party. That night, I sat in my kitchen staring at the HOA handbook, looking for any actual regulations that supported Karen's outrageous demands. The official guidelines were surprisingly reasonable. Gatherings were allowed. Music was permitted until 10 p.m. Street parking was completely legal. Karen had been making up rules and enforcement authority that did not exist. She was banking on my ignorance and desire to avoid conflict to control every aspect of my life. But as I researched deeper into HOA law and regulations, a different kind of plan began forming in my mind. If Karen wanted to play games with rules and enforcement, then I would play by the actual rules. All of them. I would comply with every single official HOA regulation to the letter. I would document everything. I would create a paper trail that proved my complete cooperation with legitimate community standards. And then I would give Karen exactly what she was asking for. That is when I started researching the world's hottest peppers. I spent hours reading about capsaicin levels, Scoville heat units, and something called Pepper X that made ghost peppers look like mild salsa. According to everything I read, Pepper X was officially the hottest pepper on Earth, measuring over 3.18 million Scoville heat units. For comparison, police pepper spray typically measures around 2 million Scoville units. The plan crystallized in my mind with beautiful clarity. Karen had made it clear that she and her HOA cronies would inevitably crash my nephew's party, looking for violations and reasons to cause trouble. They always did. It was their pattern. But what if I gave them exactly what they were looking for? What if I prepared something special just for them? I would follow every single HOA rule. I would document everything properly. I would create clear warnings and signage. I would be the perfect, compliant resident. And when Karen and her enforcement squad showed up uninvited to harass my family, they would discover that sometimes getting exactly what you ask for is the worst thing that can happen to you. The beautiful part was that Karen's own predictable behavior would be her downfall. She could not resist the opportunity to intimidate and control. She would not be able to help herself. I ordered the peppers that night. The package arrived 3 days later in a small, innocuous cardboard box that looked like it contained vitamins or supplements. Inside, carefully wrapped in multiple layers of protective plastic, were 6 small red peppers that looked deceptively harmless. I had done extensive research before ordering them. Pepper X was developed by a pepper expert named Ed Curry specifically to be the world's hottest pepper. At 3.18 million Scoville heat units, these little red devils were more than 3 times hotter than the hottest habanero pepper. They were literally hotter than most pepper sprays used by law enforcement. The website had included multiple warnings about proper handling procedures. I needed nitrile gloves, safety glasses, and adequate ventilation. The peppers were so potent that even touching them with bare skin could cause chemical burns. Perfect! I spent the next evening researching safe handling procedures and ordering protective equipment. Double-layer nitrile gloves, safety goggles, and a respirator mask that looked like something from a hazmat team. I also ordered milk, ice cream, and bread in bulk, just in case I accidentally exposed myself during preparation. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would prepare 2 identical batches of chili for Tommy's birthday party. One batch would be my normal, delicious family recipe that everyone could enjoy safely. The second batch would look identical but contain enough Pepper X to create an unforgettable experience for anyone brave enough to try it. I spent the weekend practicing with smaller amounts of the pepper, trying to determine the exact quantity needed for maximum impact without causing permanent harm. The goal was not to seriously injure anyone, just to create consequences that matched their behavior. After several careful test batches, I settled on using approximately 1/4 of 1 Pepper X pepper per gallon of chili. Even that tiny amount turned the mixture into something that could probably strip paint. The real genius was in the presentation. Both chili batches would look identical, smell similar, and be served in matching containers. The only difference would be the warning signs. I spent hours designing clear, professional-looking signs that would be technically visible, but easy to overlook if someone was not paying attention. The normal chili would have a simple, mild chili sign in small black letters. The Pepper X batch would have a bright yellow warning sign that read "Extremely Hot Pepper X Chili Caution" in bold red letters. Anyone who bothered to read the signs would be clearly warned. Anyone who ignored the warnings would be making their own choice. I also prepared backup warning materials. I printed information sheets about Pepper X, including Scoville ratings and safety information. I bought small cards that explained the heat level and potential effects of consuming extremely hot peppers. Everything would be clearly labeled and documented. The legal protection was crucial. I researched food service laws and liability issues. As long as I provided clear warnings and did not actively deceive anyone about the contents, serving extremely hot food was completely legal. People ate super hot peppers in restaurants and competitions all the time. But the most important part of my preparation was documentation. I set up multiple security cameras around my backyard, positioned to capture every angle of the party area. I tested the camera angles to make sure they would clearly show the warning signs and record everything that happened. I also prepared a detailed timeline and checklist for the party day. Everything needed to be perfect. The cameras needed to be recording before guests arrived. The warning signs needed to be clearly visible and properly positioned. The chili batches needed to be clearly labeled and separated. The night before Tommy's party, I suited up in my protective gear and prepared the Pepper X chili batch. Even with gloves, goggles, and a respirator, the peppers were so potent that my eyes started watering just from being in the same room. I followed every safety protocol perfectly. I prepared the chili in a completely separate pot using separate utensils. I labeled everything clearly and stored the deadly batch in a distinctive container that could not be confused with the normal food. As I cleaned up the kitchen, removing every trace of pepper residue and disposing of all protective equipment safely, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that reminded me of Christmas morning as a kid. Tomorrow, Karen and her HOA enforcement squad would almost certainly show up at my nephew's birthday party, looking for violations and reasons to cause trouble. They would demand to inspect my food preparation, question my guests, and generally try to ruin a child's celebration. But this time, I would be ready for them. I had followed every rule. I had prepared clear warnings. I had documented everything properly. When they inevitably demanded to sample my food, looking for health code violations or reasons to file complaints, I would politely offer them exactly what they asked for. And then Karen would discover that sometimes getting exactly what you demand is the worst thing that can happen to you. I went to bed that night with a smile on my face, knowing that tomorrow would be a day Karen Henderson would never, ever forget. The cameras were ready, the chili was prepared, the warnings were clearly posted. Let the games begin. Saturday morning dawned bright and perfect, exactly the kind of beautiful day that made suburban barbecues feel magical. I was up early, setting up tables, arranging decorations, and making final preparations for Tommy's 12th birthday celebration. My family started arriving around noon. My brother Mike brought Tommy and his younger sister Emma. My parents drove in from the next town over. A few family friends and neighbors who actually liked me joined the gathering. It was exactly the kind of small, joyful celebration that should have been completely unremarkable in any normal neighborhood. I had positioned the two chili pots prominently on the food table, each with their respective warning signs clearly visible. The normal chili sat under a simple black and white, mild chili label. 3 feet away, the Pepper X Death Trap sat under a bright yellow warning sign with bold red letters that read Extremely Hot Pepper X Chili Caution. Anyone with functioning eyesight could not miss the difference. My security cameras were recording everything from multiple angles. I had tested each camera angle that morning to ensure they captured the warning signs, the food table, and the entire backyard area where the confrontation would inevitably occur. For the first 2 hours, everything was perfect. Tommy opened his presents, we played cornhole and listened to music at a reasonable volume, and everyone enjoyed the normal chili along with hamburgers and hot dogs. It was exactly the kind of peaceful family gathering that should have been celebrated in any community. But I knew it would not last. At exactly 2:47 p.m., Karen appeared at my back gate like a shark that had smelled blood in the water. She was not alone. Behind her marched 3 official-looking people carrying clipboards, measuring devices, and cameras of their own. I recognized 2 of them from HOA board meetings. The third was someone I had never seen before, wearing a badge that read Community Compliance Inspector. "Good afternoon," Karen announced loudly, her voice cutting through our family conversation like a fire alarm. "We are here to conduct a routine inspection of this residential gathering to ensure compliance with community standards." My nephew Tommy stopped mid-sentence, staring at these strangers who had just invaded his birthday party. My parents looked confused and embarrassed. The mood of joyful celebration instantly transformed into tense confrontation. "Karen, this is a private family gathering in my own backyard." "Yes, but it is also a residential event that falls under HOA oversight," she replied smoothly, consulting her clipboard. "We have received multiple complaints about noise levels, parking violations, and potential health code issues." The compliance inspector stepped forward, pulling out what looked like a decibel meter. "We need to document current noise levels and verify that food preparation meets safety standards." They spent the next 20 minutes aggressively inspecting every aspect of my perfectly legal birthday party. They measured sound levels while we were having normal conversations. They counted guests and photographed license plates. They examined my grilling setup and questioned whether my hamburger preparation met residential food safety standards. It was exactly the kind of harassment I had expected, but watching them intimidate my family and ruin Tommy's birthday party filled me with cold fury. Finally, Karen approached the food table with the predatory focus of someone who had found exactly what she was looking for. "We need to inspect food preparation and ingredients to ensure compliance with health standards," she announced. "There have been complaints about unusual cooking smells and potential food safety violations." She pointed directly at my chili pots. "What exactly is in these containers?" "The left pot contains mild chili. The right pot contains extremely hot chili made with pepper X peppers." I gestured clearly to the warning signs, making sure the cameras captured my explanation. Both containers are clearly labeled with appropriate warnings about heat levels and ingredients. Karen exchanged glances with her inspection team. I could see the calculation in her eyes. She had found her violation. "We need to sample both containers to verify ingredients and ensure food safety compliance," the compliance inspector declared. "Of course," I replied politely. "But I do want to emphasize that the yellow container contains extremely hot peppers. The warning sign clearly indicates that this chili contains pepper X, which measures over 3 million Scoville heat units." Karen's smile was triumphant. "We appreciate your cooperation, but we are trained professionals. We need to verify that your food preparation meets community standards." She grabbed a plastic spoon and approached the Pepper X container with complete confidence. "I am sure we can handle whatever you have prepared," she said dismissively. The other HOA members gathered around, equally confident in their authority and completely ignoring the bright yellow warning sign that was literally inches from their faces. Karen scooped up a generous spoonful of the death chili and examined it closely. "This appears to be standard chili preparation," she announced to her team. Then she put the entire spoonful in her mouth. The first few seconds were almost anticlimactic. Karen chewed thoughtfully, as if she were judging a cooking competition. The other HOA members waited for her assessment. Then Pepper X kicked in. Karen's eyes went wide first. Then her face turned bright red. Then she made a sound I had never heard a human being make before, somewhere between a gasp and a scream. "Water," she croaked, but her voice was barely audible. The other HOA members, apparently thinking Karen was overreacting to normal chili, decided to prove their own toughness by sampling the Pepper X as well. 3 more generous spoonfuls disappeared into 3 more mouths. The backyard erupted into chaos. What happened next was the most beautiful disaster I have ever witnessed. Karen dropped to her knees first, clutching her throat and making choking sounds that sent my nephew running to hide behind his father. Her face had gone from red to purple, and tears were streaming down her cheeks like waterfalls. "Oh God," she gasped between sobs. Oh God, what did you do to me?" The compliance inspector was next. He stumbled backward from the food table, his measuring equipment scattered across my patio as he frantically clawed at his mouth with both hands. The official clipboard that had seemed so important 30 seconds earlier was forgotten on the ground as he fell to his hands and knees, retching violently. The 2 HOA board members tried to maintain their dignity for approximately 15 more seconds before the Pepper X overwhelmed their systems completely. One of them, a stern woman in her 60s who had spent the last hour lecturing me about community standards, was now rolling back and forth on my lawn, wailing like a wounded animal. The 4th member of their inspection team had grabbed my garden hose and was attempting to spray water directly into his mouth, but that only seemed to spread the burning sensation around his face and down his shirt. "I need milk," Karen screamed, though her voice was so hoarse it came out as more of a croak. "Get me milk right now." I calmly walked into my kitchen and returned with a gallon of milk and several glasses, moving with deliberate slowness while my security cameras captured every moment of their suffering. "Here you go," I said politely, setting the milk on the patio table. Though I should mention that dairy products only provide temporary relief from capsaicin, the burning sensation will continue for approximately 30 to 45 minutes. Karen lunged for the milk like a drowning person reaching for a life preserver. She poured an entire glass into her mouth, gargled desperately, then immediately vomited it back up onto my perfectly manicured lawn. The compliance inspector was now completely prostrate on the ground, his face buried in the grass as he sobbed uncontrollably. His official badge had fallen off somewhere during his thrashing, and his professional demeanor had been replaced by primal suffering. "You poisoned us," one of the board members managed to scream between gasps. "This is assault. This is attempted murder." I gestured calmly toward the bright yellow warning sign that was still clearly visible 3 feet from where they were writhing in agony. "Ma'am, the container was clearly labeled as extremely hot chili containing pepper X peppers. I specifically warned all of you about the heat level before you chose to consume it. I also have information sheets available that explain the Scoville rating and potential effects." My brother was recording everything on his phone, looking absolutely stunned by what he was witnessing. My parents had taken Tommy and Emma inside, though I could see them peeking through the sliding glass door with expressions of shock and fascination. Karen attempted to stand up, failed, and collapsed back onto the lawn. Her perfectly styled hair was now matted with tears, snot, and bits of grass. The woman who had spent months terrorizing me with clipboards and violation notices was reduced to a whimpering mess on my property. "We are calling the police," she managed to gasp. "You are going to jail for this." "You are absolutely welcome to call the police," I replied calmly. "I have multiple security cameras recording everything that happened here today. The footage will show that I clearly warned all of you about the contents of that chili, and that you voluntarily chose to consume it despite visible warnings and my verbal cautions." The compliance inspector tried to speak, but could only produce a sound like a dying elephant. He had given up trying to stand and was now simply rolling back and forth on the ground, occasionally letting out pitiful moans. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos I had taken of the warning signs before the party started. I also have documentation showing that all warning signs were clearly visible and properly positioned. I have information sheets about pepper X peppers and their effects. I followed all food safety protocols. Karen's eyes were so swollen from crying that she could barely see, but she managed to focus on my phone screen. The realization that she had been completely outmaneuvered was almost as painful as the peppers burning her mouth. "You planned this," she wheezed. "I prepared clearly labeled food for a private party and provided appropriate warnings about ingredients," I corrected. "You chose to ignore those warnings and consume food that was clearly marked as extremely hot." The HOA board members were now attempting to crawl toward my back gate, apparently hopping to escape the scene of their humiliation. But the Pepper X was not finished with them yet. Every few feet, one of them would collapse again, overcome by waves of burning pain. My neighbors had begun gathering at their back fences to watch the spectacle. The same people who had been recruited by Karen to spy on my activities were now witnessing her complete breakdown on my lawn. Mrs. Peterson from 2 houses down was recording everything on her tablet. The elderly couple next door was standing on lawn chairs to get a better view over their fence. Even the kids from across the street had climbed their backyard tree to watch the show. Karen made one final attempt to assert her authority, struggling to her feet and pointing an accusing finger at me with a hand that was shaking uncontrollably. "This is not over," she managed to say through her tears and swollen lips. "We will make sure you pay for this." Then she immediately doubled over and vomited again. The retreat was as chaotic as the meltdown. The 4 HOA enforcers stumbled toward my back gate like survivors of a natural disaster, leaving behind their clipboards, measuring equipment, and every shred of dignity they had possessed when they arrived. Karen was the last to leave, pausing at my gate to turn back and glare at me with eyes that were barely visible through the swelling and tears. "You think you won," she croaked, "but we will find a way to get you for this." I smiled politely and waved goodbye. "Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, Karen, and thank you for stopping by Tommy's birthday party." The aftermath was even more satisfying than the main event. Karen did exactly what I expected her to do. Within 2 hours of limping away from my backyard, she had filed police reports for assault, poisoning, and reckless endangerment. She demanded that I be arrested immediately for attacking HOA officials with chemical weapons. The police officer who responded to her complaint was professional but clearly skeptical. Officer Martinez arrived at my door that evening, notebook in hand, asking for my side of the story. I invited him in and showed him everything. The security camera footage of Karen and her team ignoring clear warning signs. The photos of the bright yellow, extremely hot labels. The information sheets about Pepper X peppers that I had prepared. The documentation of their verbal warnings that I had provided before they chose to consume the chili. "So let me get this straight," Officer Martinez said, reviewing the evidence. "You clearly labeled extremely hot food, warned them multiple times about the heat level, and they chose to eat it anyway while conducting an inspection of your private party." "That is correct. Everything is documented on multiple camera angles." He watched the footage of Karen confidently dismissing my warnings and consuming a large spoonful of Pepper X chili. He saw her team following suit, ignoring the visible signs and verbal cautions. "Sir, this appears to be a civil matter at best. You provided clear warnings about food contents, and they voluntarily consumed it. There is no criminal activity here." Karen's police report was dismissed within 48 hours. But her humiliation was just beginning. The security camera footage somehow found its way onto neighborhood social media groups. Someone had edited together a highlight reel of Karen and her enforcement team rolling around on my lawn, complete with dramatic music and slow-motion replays of their confident approach to the chili table. The video spread through Sunset Meadows like wildfire. Within a week, everyone in the community had seen Karen's spectacular meltdown. The woman who had terrorized residents with violation notices and harassment campaigns was now the neighborhood laughingstock. The HOA board called an emergency meeting to address the incident. I attended with printed copies of every frivolous violation notice Karen had filed against me, along with documentation of her harassment campaign and illegal surveillance activities. The board president, clearly embarrassed by the whole situation, quietly asked Karen to step down from all community liaison positions. Her days of self-appointed neighborhood enforcement were officially over.